welcome Brook Peterson to talk about Aqaba and the Red Sea. And just as a quick reminder to everyone, please keep yourself muted during the presentation so we can clearly hear Brook and everything she has to tell us. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Brook, and I'll stop sharing so you can share.
All right, thank you. Give me just a second to this working. All right, is that showing now?
Oh,
Yes.
yep, it is there.
Okay. All right then. Thank you for having me. I really enjoy doing this kind of presentation, especially on things that were new to me. And Aqaba was definitely new to me. I did this trip about a year ago, and it's not something I would have ever thought to do or ever planned. But somebody contacted me on my Instagram page and asked if I would come and take pictures of their resort and their area around, their diving, and they would pay my way to come and do that. So it was a kind of a commercial trip that I did. I actually paid my own way as far as the flights went, but then they put us up in a hotel and they came and got us every day and took us diving and lots of other things, which I'm going to talk about today. So it was a really fun trip, and I'm really glad I did it because I didn't know anything about Jordan. Just before I start, if you don't know where Jordan is, I'll talk about that in a minute, but just in May of this year, United Airlines now has a direct flight from Boston to Amman, Jordan, and that's where you have to fly into. That's their international airport, and so makes it easier to get there than when I went. Even when I went, it wasn't difficult at all. We just flew through London and then straight there, so it wasn't a difficult place to get into, and very fun to do. So with that, let's go on to a little bit. I need to. Sorry, I've got too many things on my screen and I can't see me. Let me make one little. I can make myself small. There we go. Whoops, I can only see Mackenzie. All right, just getting your faces out of the way. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about is what they call up there the Golden Triangle. And the Golden Triangle is three things, and only one of them is diving. So diving in Aqaba, and then some other things that you can do there, Wadi Rum and Petra. And those are the three main attractions in that area. And there is something special about Aqaba. And it's probably not what you think. This is what was the big surprise to me. So Aqaba is a part of the Red Sea. It's the very tip of one of the arms that goes up of the Red Sea, and there is a lot of the same life that you might see in the Red Sea, but not nearly as dense of life up there, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but let me explain a little bit where Jordan is. So if you look at this map on the left-hand side, you can see Jordan in the very top, and see how there's the whole Red Sea there, and you have Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and then up at the top of that is Jordan, and it's up at the very tip of the left-hand, or excuse me, the right-hand side of the Red Sea. And so not much of Jordan has any shoreline, just a little tiny bit of it. If you look down in the middle map, you can see that just where it says Aqaba, that's the only part of Jordan that touches water. And it's not very much shoreline, it's just a little bit, but it's also kind of a special area. And then if you look at the map on the right-hand side, you can see Aqaba, that's the dot, and you can see Amman. So you would fly into Amman, and then there's two ways to get down to Aqaba. We took a plane, and it was about an hour flight. It was a small, they have a airport there in Aqaba, and it was a small plane, but that was just fine. Or you can take a bus, and it only costs something like $30, and it's a 4-hour drive, but that's another way you can get down there really inexpensively if you want to. But we flew, and that's how we got there. So there's Aqaba down there, and then to the right, you see those three blue dots, it's Wadi Rum, and then right above that is Petra, and that's what they call the Golden Triangle. So there are those three things there. Wadi Rum is about an hour from Aqaba, Petra is about an hour from Wadi Rum. So it makes a really nice visit if you go for more than a week. Okay, this is what it looks like. This was from the hotel's roof that we stayed at, and this is looking out over the very tip of that finger that I was telling you about. If you look on the left-hand side of the water, you can see kind of a ship there and a little peninsula that sticks out in the water. Down that coast is where we did our diving. On the right-hand side of this picture is Israel, and so we didn't do anything over in Israel. But because this area is in the tip of this not peninsula, I can't think what it's called, the tip of the Red Sea anyway. There isn't a lot of water that flows through there. This is where the water stops. And so because of that, it's subject to a lot of things that are really sensitive, like the flora and fauna is very sensitive to pollution and to a lot of boat traffic and that kind of thing. And so it has over the years, overfishing is a big problem because once you've taken the fish, there's no more coming through. They, unless they happen to come up to that end of the water. So they've had some problems with that. So let me just talk about some of that. It's the only city in Jordan that has a coastline, and it lies at the northern tip of the Red Sea, and there is no outlet. And it is susceptible to all of these things, but because of that, there's a lot of destruction of the marine habitat there, and there has been for many, many years. And so at this point, there's not a lot of nice marine habitat left. There's a lot of sandy bottom with small coral heads here and there. But there are a lot of environmental advocates there that are making a difference, and they're making it in a really interesting way. And they're using tourism as one of the tools to revive the marine ecosystem there. And so that's the big deal why you would go there, is to go to the Aqaba's Underwater Military Museum. So the military museum, it consists of 19 vehicles that are military vehicles that were purpose sunk for divers. And the Jordanian king, who is Abdullah II, and his son, who is Crown Prince Hussein bin Abdullah, they are scuba diving enthusiasts. And they take a hands-on approach to ruling Jordan, and that includes an active role in preserving and restoring the coastal waters. So in July of 2019, so this museum has only been down for just a couple of years, and right before COVID hit. So it really hasn't been dived very much by very many people at all. But in July of 2019, he created this tourist attraction, and it's unique, and it's aimed at restoring the overfished area of the sea and also encouraging tourism. And the idea of that is that these vehicles that are underwater will attract marine life, which they do and already have, and I'll show that, and also attract tourism to help bring more dollars into the area. And also that type of tourism helps to promote the marine environment, because then the people who live there, instead of fishing, they're more interested in getting tourists to go diving and that kind of thing. So it's a really interesting concept and a really great way of trying to come up with a way to help restore and preserve their marine environment that they have. These are some of the vehicles that are down there. The vehicles are sunk in military formation, with the deepest vehicles being at about 90 feet and the most shallow being at 15 feet. And you can swim to the shallowest part from shore, and so you can snorkel it if you'd like to. The water's clear enough that you can see the vehicles even down at 90 feet. And so it's very interesting. There's all kinds of things. There's big tanks and big transport vehicles, and also smaller tanks and cannons, and there's 2 helicopters, there's Jeeps and other smaller vehicles. There's an ambulance you can see there in that picture. And all of these vehicles were meticulously cleaned before they were put underwater, cleaned of things like oil or anything that might harm the environment, but still preserve the look of the vehicles. So they were careful about the way they did it. They didn't just go and dump them all in the ocean. They were careful about cleaning them, and it was a big project that took many years to do. And then they were all put down about the same time in 2019, in the summer and fall of 2019. Here's a few more of the vehicles that you can see. A big tank, and also the ambulance again. And you can see how they're in formation as you swim up the hill. It's kind of like a big road where all of these vehicles are on the road, and they're all mainly facing the same direction, like they're driving up the hill. That's how they are. Oh, the purpose of the display here is multi-leveled. like I talked about before, on its most basic level, it serves as a tourist attraction. But it's much, much more than that, and it's an effort to help restore this thriving ecosystem. One of the great benefits of the Underwater Military Museum is that it will provide a place for marine life to thrive and rebound. So in just the 2 years that it was down when I saw it, um, lots of fish had already taken up residence inside of the tanks or inside of the vehicles. There's a lot of algae growth already. It may not look like that so much on the outside, but um, the algae is like maybe a ½ inch thick all over it, or in patches all over it, and you'll see that in some of the other pictures that I have. Um, and I already talked about how it's laid out. So the two things that are the deepest are at 90 feet are the helicopters. There's 2 helicopters down there, and they're really interesting. And they don't they didn't dive nitrox when I was there, and so we had to use air, and so we didn't have a lot of bottom time on the helicopters, only 15 or 20 minutes, and I would have liked to have had a lot longer with them because the windows are intact, and it was a great place to put in remote lighting and have, light up the helicopter from the inside so that it's shown out. And I would have just liked to have spent more time on that. So if I went back, I would plan to do that a little bit differently. Here are a few more of the vehicles. These are smaller tanks up in the upper left-hand corner, and the bottom left is they're like single vehicles, like little. They're not Jeeps, but they're about the size of a Jeep. And then that is a Jeep on the right-hand side on the top, and that's the one that's in real shallow water at the end of the dive. And you can snorkel out to it. There's actually 2 Jeeps up there on the hill, and this one was a little bit prettier than the other one. It had the other one has. It looks like it's been in a car accident. It has a little bit more damage to it, so it wasn't as interesting. But also, there were quite a few fish around. Of course, as soon as I swam up to them, the fish hid. But if you look, you can see little orange dots. That's lots of little anthias that are hiding in and around the vehicle. So for underwater photographers, the sites in Aqaba are really a dream come true because not only are there 19 military vehicles in the museum, but in all of Aqaba, they have sunk several ships. They've sunk several airplanes, the Hercules aircraft carrier, and a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar passenger jetliner, which was really awesome. I don't know of any other place where you can dive a jetliner that was purpose sunk for divers. So that was really interesting, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. The museum itself includes 2 helicopters, tanks, an ambulance, troop carriers, and several other types of vehicles. So as a photographer, you're really only limited by what you can imagine you can do. And I tried lots of different things. I tried putting video lights inside some of the vehicles, and my husband is a great model, and so he modeled for me quite a bit on a lot of these images. Although I maybe didn't put any in here, but he did a lot of modeling for me. And there's just a lot of interesting things you can do. You can try shooting with filters so that you've got a lot more color. And that the Jeep right there in the top right hand, that's shot with a filter, so you can see how much more color is in that picture. And then even the ones at depth that are 70 to 90 feet deep, you can still get quite a bit of color out of them even without any strobes. So anyway, there's quite a bit that you can do as far as being creative with photography on these. The next thing I want to talk about is one of the ships that was sunk. So this ship was put down in 1986, and it's called the Cedar Pride. And this was also put down by the same king who sunk the military museum, but he was a much younger man in 1986. And this is one of the first things that he put down. And so there is a lot of growth on this. It's been down for 40 years, or 86 to now. I don't know how long that is, but quite a long time, 30, 35, 36 years. Let's say I was married in 1986, so 36 years it's been down. And it's one of the first artificial reefs that he created. And one of its best features is the crow's nest. So the crow's nest, if you look at the top right-hand picture, that big pole that goes all the way out, on the top, at the end of that is the crow's nest. And then the bottom left-hand corner, you can see what that looks like. It's just covered with all kinds of growth, and it's a really pretty feature of the ship, and so really interesting to see. I know it looks like it's on a hill that it's about to topple down. That picture is a little bit deceiving. The hill isn't that steep at all. It is on its side a little bit, but the ship is not in danger of rolling off the edge. It's The hill's not quite that steep. But anyway, it's a really interesting ship. It has a lot of really interesting features on it. It's a pretty ship to look at and to visit. There's a little bit of penetration, but not a lot. And I'm going to talk about this little spot on the airspace here. So if you go on the side of the ship, you can go under and you can pop up and go into this little airspace. And they tell you to be careful because it's mostly just, it's been for years and years, there's no oxygen left. It's just people's exhale from their regulators that fills that airspace now. And so not to take out your regulator and not to breathe the air there because there's no oxygen in it. But I wanted to get this split shot, and this is my husband in this shot. I wanted to get a split shot so that you could kind of see this airspace better. And I was trying to give him directions underwater. So I did take my regulator out and I was talking to him, and I started feeling a little lightheaded and I'm panting, and then I realized I wasn't actually breathing oxygen. I was just breathing probably carbon monoxide or whatever else was in there. And so I put my regulator back in, and I literally had to just close my eyes and breathe for a little bit. It was a little bit scary because I didn't realize what that would do to you, not having oxygen, so it just made me really a little lightheaded, and I just had to recover. So I would not advise taking your regulator out. If you want to pop up and see what it looks like, keep breathing through your regulator like they tell you to. Anyway, that was just one little interesting thing, but still it's interesting to look at and to pop up and see. So I do recommend you go and see it. Just don't breathe the air. Okay, and then inside of they have an airplane there called the Hercules C-130, and this one was sunk in 2019, so it's only been down a couple of years. But right after the spring of 2020, like right when the whole world shut down, they had a really big storm there, and it was torn apart. The middle of the airplane collapsed, and so now all it is the front of the plane and the tail. It looks like it's been down there forever because it's so damaged, but it's really only been down just a couple of years. So you can go into the front part. This cockpit of this plane is huge, and if you go in, you'll notice that the Jordanians have a real sense of humor. So the top left-hand picture, you can kind of see a skeleton standing there. So they have the skeleton. It's just a plastic skeleton, but they had it strapped into the pilot's seat, and he has on a pilot's cap, and he used to have his hands on the controls, but he came loose and now he's floating a little bit above the pilot's seat. But anyway, inside of that, it's a really huge area with the big windows to see out. And it's just full of small fish. It had huge schools of small fish in there, sheltering underneath that. So it's a great place for new life and smaller life to shelter and get bigger. So it's working. And also, if you look underneath the wing on the bottom picture, those corals, so those soft corals are, like I said, the ship has only been down for a couple of years, and that's how much the coral growth is. And I asked our guide about that, and he said that those corals come and go. He said they'll be there, and then they'll die off, or they'll leave over the winter time, and then in the summertime they come back and they grow huge like that again. So they do grow quite fast, which I thought was really interesting because I was under the impression that it took much longer to get that kind of growth than it did. But anyway, that was one of the interesting things. So there's quite a bit of growth on this plane in those places. You can go inside the tail section. It's just a big empty section. And not really very interesting. There's nothing really to see in there. But I thought the outside of the tail was a little bit more interesting. So those are things that you can see and explore. This also, it only sits in 60 feet of water. So it's a really great recreational dive. It's not that far from shore. You can swim out to it, but most people dive it by boat, but you could get out there if you wanted to. You could swim out to it. Okay, and then the next one is the TriStar L1011. So a TriStar L1011 is a jetliner that has 3 rows of 3 seats. So 3, 3, and 3. And in this plane, they've taken out the middle row seats so that divers can get in and see what it looks like. But everything else is intact. This jetliner is so big that I couldn't get it all in one picture. Because the water's clear, but to get back far enough to fit the entire plane in, the water just wasn't clear enough to get an entire plane in. It's very, very large. And if you look at the back of the plane where the diver is going in that back door. Right above that is the air intake. And so you can go into that back door and go back into the back of the plane and swim up through the air intake. And then the picture on the right-hand side in the bottom is coming out of that air intake. So you can see how big that really is. It's just really huge and really interesting, and makes for a nice picture and an interesting part of the dive. And then also the cockpit is much, much smaller than the Hercules is. It has just the two pilot and co-pilot seats, and there's a jump seat in there. But it was also quite interesting. All the controls are still in there. One of the windows is broken. The front window you can see is broken, but it's also really just an interesting plane to look at. So a lot to see in there. We're gonna go inside here and see some of the other things. So this is going through the plane from the back forward. So after we checked out the air intake, we went through the back door, and you can see how all the seats are still there. Also, the luggage compartments are still there. There are televisions, but they're not on the backs of the seats. There's some pop down televisions like they had in the older planes. This is a little bit older plane. And also it's easy to explore because that middle section has all been removed. So there's plenty of room for you to swim through. And I said before, the Jordanians have a sense of humor. So watch out for surprises in this plane because they planted a few for you to find, and I'll show you those. All right, so the picture right in the middle, that's a stewardess inside the head, and she's got a sign that says, "Please fasten your seatbelts." And she's a skeleton, obviously, but she's got on a cute little jacket and a cute little skirt, just like a stewardess would. So that's one of the fun things. And then if you go into the other head, the oxygen masks have dropped down. And then the picture on the left-hand side is the galley where they prepare all the meals and stuff for the passengers. And you can see how much growth is inside of this. So this is another plane that's only been down for a couple of years, but there's a lot of growth on the inside, a lot of fish inside. In just a short time. So there's quite a bit of new growth here. And so I think that their idea to make these artificial reefs is a good one. It's something that they can do that doesn't do harm to the environment. That may be debatable for some people, but I don't think it does harm. I think that those types of artificial reefs are good because they bring in shelter for smaller fish so that the bigger fish can also grow bigger. And it makes a great tourist attraction. There's a lot to see there, and it's a lot of fun. It's just a fun thing to dive and to see. This is a tank it's up on the hill about a 5 to 7 minute swim away from that Hercules, that big airplane, the Hercules airplane. And you can do this all in one dive. You can dive the Hercules and spend 30 or 40 minutes on that, and then swim up to this and spend another 10 or 15 minutes around the tank up there. And it's a really nice tank. It's in shallow water. I think it's about 20 feet deep here. And the corals on it are there's a lot of corals. So this has been down more than a couple of years, probably 5 to 10 years. It's not really part of the military museum. It's just another dive site that you could go and see, or you could also snorkel it if you wanted to. But there's quite a bit more growth on here. You can see that a lot of the hard corals have started to grow on this, and there were lots of fish around it. Although with a model, some of the fish get scared and go inside. But anyway, there was quite a bit to see there. So that was really interesting. And they also have there are some beautiful things to see too. The reefs are not as, they don't flourish as much as the Red Sea. If you've been to the Red Sea, there's coral and soft coral and hard coral and beautiful walls and millions of fish everywhere. And it's not like that, but they do have really nice features. So this huge Gorgonian fan, they call this site Gorgonian 1, and they were so excited to show it, this huge Gorgonian that they have. And it is an impressive Gorgonian, but I've been diving a lot of places in the world, and there's sea fans all over the place, but they have this one big one. So it's really interesting to them and exciting to them to go down and show it. And it is big, and it is kind of fantastic. And then they had another site called Gorgonian 2. We didn't dive it, but they said, yeah, they have 2 big Gorgonians that they like to show off to their guests. So we did go down and see that. And then there were a lot of other things, a lot of rocky reef that had all kinds of interesting fish like frogfish and a lot of the flasher wrasse and that kind of thing were in this area. It was really beautiful. And then also the picture on the left, or excuse me, on the right hand side, there every dive shop has a jetty in front of it, and it's probably most of them are shallow, like 10 to 15 feet deep, but they have a lot of growth underneath them, a lot of soft corals that are really beautiful, and lots of little fish and little octopus and lionfish, all kinds of things, little pipefish and macro stuff around on these pillars that are underneath these jetties. So that was really fun. We did one dive. I think I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. Yeah. So we did one dive towards the end of the trip where we drove down to a jetty that was a mile or two, maybe a half mile, I forget, a distance down the road, and they dropped us off there, and we just swam all the way from that one back to the jetty where the dive shop that we dove out of was. And in doing that, we were able to stop at all the jetties along the way and look under them. They were really beautiful. You can see how the sunlight was coming through the boards above, and they're most of them pretty shallow. And then in between them, there were a lot of things to see too. There was there's a lot of grass, and so we saw turtles and we saw eels and things that live in the grass. There were also some little coral heads and lots of antheas. So it was a really nice dive just to see what the shoreline looked like. And we did that dive and just spent an hour swimming straight down and looking at things. And then also this one that says jetty on it. So that's it is a big jetty, and it's where big ships come in, and they don't really use that as a dive site for tourists. But we took a little special trip there that day. It's much deeper. It's about 50 or 60 feet, those long poles that hold it up. It's a much bigger jetty. And so you can dive under it if you have permission, or if you're careful about it. If your dive shop knows the right people, then it's okay to dive under there. And we did do that, and it was beautiful. There was a lot to see. It was probably one of my favorite dives, a lot of beautiful sunbeams coming down and that kind of thing. So a really nice little dive. And then there's ghost nets and other things that you can see that have been happening for many, many years. And so this frogfish, that if you can tell, that's a frogfish in the right hand picture. He's inside of an old net, and the net has been down so long it's encrusted with sponges and other things. It's become kind of a part of the reef, and there was a lot of that down there, just old nets that have become part of the environment down there. At this point, they're too old, and to remove them now would be to destroy the environment. So they don't remove them. They're not really a danger anymore because they're so encrusted with other things that they're not, they don't catch the gills of other fish, and the fish actually use them, like this frogfish, to hide in. He's very camouflaged there. Okay, so after we did all the diving in Aqaba, we spent about a week or maybe 5 or 6 days diving Aqaba, and then our hosts took us to Wadi Rum. And Wadi Rum was not at all what I thought it might be. I am not a desert lover. I live right on the edge of Los Angeles, so not so far from the California desert, and it's just the lone and dreary world to me. I'd rather do anything but go to the desert. But my husband loves the desert. And so we planned a trip out to Wadi Rum, and I loved it. I had so much fun there. It's about an hour from Aqaba. It's a beautiful red desert. It's a favorite spot for movie producers. So the movie The Martian was filmed here in Wadi Rum, and the reason is because the sand is red and the mountains are red. And that picture down in the bottom left-hand corner is not a Photoshop picture. The sand was that color. It was very, very bright and orange and red. That's actually called the Red Dune, or the Red Dune, I think, something like that. And we climbed up it. It goes up pretty high. It's quite a climb to get up to the top of it. And it was really interesting. So, also Lawrence of Arabia was filmed here, and he lived there. And I'll show his house in a few minutes. And then the locals have camels. The Bedouin people live out in the desert in Wadi Rum, and they have camels, and the camels are just scattered all over the desert. You just come across them. A lot of them are hobbled. A lot of them just wander free. They're not like they're wild camels. They do belong to people, but they just wander, and I guess they feed on the sparse grasses and things they find there. But anyway, you can see camels everywhere, so you'll see a lot of camels in my pictures. And speaking of that, you can take a camel ride for $3. It only costs $3, and they'll put you on the camel and walk you around, and you can see what it's like. I had absolutely no desire to ride a camel. I used to ride horses when I was younger, but I just didn't feel like I could handle the camel, so I didn't do it. But my husband did. He took a ride. Um, the travel is done in these small pickup trucks, like these little four-door pickup trucks, and the guests sit in the back of the pickup. You can see they put these benches on the back rails of the truck with a little shade over them, and so you can sit back there, and then the driver just takes you around. And it was about a 4-hour tour, so we got there maybe 11 or noon in the morning, and we spent the whole afternoon driving around seeing the sights, and it was really, really interesting. There's just a lot to see there. And by the way, it is not hot like you might think. So we were there in September last year, and this is the elevation here is maybe 2 to 4,000 feet. So because there's quite a few mountains and hills in this area, and it was pleasant. The temperature, I mean, it was warm, but it wasn't. It was probably 75 to 85 degrees. It wasn't terrible. And Petra is even cooler. It's even a little bit higher. And so even in the middle of the summer, it was chilly in the morning when we got there, and then warmed up throughout the day, but it was never overly hot. So don't be afraid of that if you want to go there. I know it looks desolate, but it's not as hot. And they actually get snow in the wintertime in Wadi Rum and also in Petra. So if they get those kinds of storms, they can have snow. So it's not as hot as you might think. Anyway, after the tour of the desert, you do this. That's kind of a standard tour that they do, and then you would stay overnight in a tent in a Bedouin camp. And these tents are way more than you would expect to. They have some that are called bubble tents that are luxurious, and they're open. They have like the top of them is either glass or it's material, plastic, acrylic, or something that you can see through, and so you can lay there and look at the stars all night if you want. Some of them are not quite as classy. The one we stayed in was quite nice. It was brand new. I'll show it to you in a few minutes. Here are some of the other sites that we saw. There are a lot of petroglyphs and caves and dunes. And then on the bottom right-hand side, that's Lawrence of Arabia's home, or what's left of it. It's in ruins now, but that's where he lived. So kind of interesting to see that it was just built up against a rock, and then not really quite sure how the layout of it was. We looked inside, but it was just a square empty space. So and most of the walls are torn down there. And also at the bottom, this is back at the red dune that I was talking about, that picture of my husband and I. At the bottom of it, there's a little tent, I guess. I don't know how permanent it was, but there was some people there that had rugs for sale, and they had their scarves for sale, and they tied the scarves for us so that we could wear them, and in the traditional way that they wear them. And they gave us some tea, and we bought some sage tea and brought that home with us. So it was a really nice visit, and it was very personal. When we went, this was the end of 2021 last year. There hadn't been any tourists there since 2020, hardly any tourists at all. And so and there weren't very many when we were there. And so it was a very personal experience. The people were just as friendly as they could be. They were eager to see us and talk to us and tell us about their heritage and their lifestyle. And we really enjoyed visiting with the people. And our guides, the couple that hosted us, or that brought me there in the first place, was a woman and her husband. And they spoke Arabic, and so they were able to do some translating for us, and they were able to take us to see people that they already knew, and that kind of thing. So that was really helpful, because then we were not tourists so much as friends of a friend, and that made the experience a little bit more personal, a little bit more fun. But we really enjoyed that quite a bit. So okay. At the end of the day, after the bike, or not the bike, the truck tour was over, they took us to a place where apparently everybody who takes truck tour goes to watch the sunset over the desert, and it was really beautiful. There were a lot of people there, probably the most people I saw all together in one place in all of Jordan while we were there, which numbered probably 200 people maybe, and they were all in different jeeps and things along the side of the hill. But they had people there giving camel rides, and they had just the trucks. All those little trucks were set up, excuse me, in different places so that people could just watch the sunset and ride around and play in the sand and that kind of thing. And so it was really very beautiful, and we enjoyed that quite a bit. Also, the rock on the right hand side, that was just a stop along the way that it was just a really interesting rock, how it's corroded with the big rock sitting on top of that pillar like that. And those are our hosts, Catherine and her husband. They were holding up the rock and showing us. So I wanted to tell you about the Bedouin camp that we stayed in, and that's what you see on the bottom left-hand side. And those tents are more like little cabins. They have windows and doors, and they have indoor bathrooms. At least the ones we stayed in did. Between those 4 units and the longer unit that you see on the end is a fire pit. And so we spent the evening sitting around the fire and listening to guitar and other music, and eating and drinking and all kinds of just really enjoying the evening. It was very, very comfortable. There weren't any bugs or anything like that. It was just really comfortable. And then that little tent on the end, the long skinny one, that's where the where they feed us. It's like a common room, a larger room. And the man who owns that camp, his wife made dinner for us and brought it out to us. And we were able to have dinner with him and also breakfast the next day. And it was very authentic and a really fun experience. One thing that I really noticed here was in the morning when I got up, when I was actually taking this picture, it was dead silent. There are no birds, there are no crickets, there's no sounds of nature at all out there. It was just dead silent, no airplanes, nothing. It was very, very quiet, and it was really interesting. I don't know that I've ever heard such silence like that before. I mean, I've been in a lot of quiet places, but there just weren't any natural sounds either. It was just very desolate, I guess you could say, but beautiful also. And so I don't want anybody to feel like, ooh, I wouldn't want to go there, because I didn't want to go there, and I really had a great time. It was really a fun experience, so enjoyed that very much. After we left Wadi Rum, we went to Petra, so that's our next stop. And we went and stayed in a hotel. So we spent the morning in Wadi Rum, and then we drove up to Petra, and we got a hotel there that night and had dinner there. And we kind of explored the village, the town, when we got to Petra, outside of Petra. And they have a museum there, and we went and visited the museum and learned about all these ruins that are there. And Petra is a very large city. You could explore it over a week's time and not see everything. We only spent a day there. And we saw a lot, but there's a lot more to see. So as you start walking to Petra, it's kind of a long trail. It's about a half mile to get in, and it's through this gorge that you can see on this picture. And as you're going through, there's things carved into the walls that are corroded away. Like they've got places where they might have put lights, lanterns, things like that are carved into the rock. There's also there's one spot where they have like it's hard to see now, but it was several camels and people that were carved into the rock, like they're also walking through the gorge. There was a lot of water that ran through that area and has corroded it away. So there was at one time a lot more, excuse me, a lot more water going through here. Petra was developed because it was a trade city. And this is before they were using a lot of trade routes. So this is about 2,000 years ago. So before they were using a lot of trade routes by sea, Petra was a major trade city. And so it was a very big city and very much the center of this area, center of trade. When you get through that gorge, the first thing you see is what they call the treasury. And that's where the 2 camels are. There's always some camels out there that you can ride. Also, if you're going through this gorge, you can take like a little golf cart. I think they charge about $10 a person for the golf cart each way, so $20 round trip, or you can walk it. You can also ride horses or mules or camels. They offer that too. I've heard that it gets very, very crowded in there, but like I said, we were there when there weren't very many tourists at all. So we had the place mostly to ourselves. There weren't very many people when we were there, which was really nice. And like I said, it was chilly in the morning as we got through here, and then it warmed up later in the afternoon. And so the first thing you get to is this treasury, and that's as far as those little golf carts go. And after that, there's no vehicles that go in, but there is a road that you can walk in. So that's about a half mile to that spot. And then our entire walk all the way into Petra to see the city and all the way back out was about 5 miles round trip. So it was a good couple hours that we spent walking and looking at things. And it was a slow walk because there's a lot to see there. Also, you don't have to walk the whole thing. Like I said, you can ride a camel or a donkey or whatever they have. They offer a lot of things there. Okay, and you can see as you walk in, there's all these buildings that are carved into the mountain, and they're not really. It's more like a facade. They're not really very deep. They're only 12 feet deep maybe on some of them. A lot of them are tombs. They're not really places that were houses or that were places of commerce. Even though that place is called the Treasury, they think it was more of a tomb because it's only a few feet deep. It doesn't go. It's not like a building like you'd see in Indiana Jones. So it's not really like that. But since the city has been deserted for the last couple of thousand years, the Bedouin people have moved in, and a lot of them have lived in them, like living in caves. So a lot of the places have been inhabited. It's not anymore because now it's a World Heritage Site. So they don't live there anymore, but they have over the years. Anyway, you can explore it over several days, or we did about 3/4 of a day is about what we spent, and that was enough for me. Although there were a lot of places that were very intriguing, I would have liked to have seen more. The bottom picture there is an amphitheater, a big amphitheater, and I thought that was really beautiful and interesting. Some of these places have been restored, and some of them are still original. So there's a lot that is intact, and then there are some places that are really in ruins, but everything that's carved into the rock is pretty much intact. So it was really, really interesting to see. Here's some more of the city that's just carved into the side. We didn't go up and explore these buildings or tombs or whatever they are, but you can see them as you walk in to the street. They're everywhere. Every place you look is full of these kinds of buildings. So very interesting to look at and wonder about. And some of them are amazing, like big castles. And I think that they told us that they were mostly tombs of really important people that were great big like this, and then the smaller ones not so much. They also have other big commercial buildings like a city center and a temple and a church and that kind of thing. And I'm going to show you some pictures of those. They're more in ruins though. Here's one with all of the donkeys that you can hop on. Like I said, we were there without very many people, so those donkeys didn't get used much when we were there, but you could ride one if you wanted, and you could ride it all the way into the city. And then also the camels. So this is a Bedouin man who had his camel for rent. You could ride him. He had actually several of them, and that's our host there on the top. I don't know if you can see her face. It might be covered with this bar, but so I can move that down to the bottom. I don't know if that helps any. Anyway, so she's up there, and she took a camel ride. She rode the camel all the rest of the way out because her feet hurt. But then she said after she got out that her butt hurt. So I'm not sure if it was worth the camel ride. Either way, you come back aching a little bit, but I think it was a fun experience for her. Let's see. Like I said, it was about a 5-mile walk. I'd like to get that bar out of the way. You can ride different ways that you can go in or walk. We did the walking, so we'll move on from here. I'm locked up. Hang on. Let me see if I can get. There we go. Okay, so this place was called it translated something like the Road of Columns or the Street of Columns or something like that. They think that these columns, they were on both sides of the street, and right now it looks like sand, but it was cobblestones that they had brought in. Those cobblestones they're really rough, and so in some places they have, like the picture in the top right, you can see the stones, but those have been restored. They're a lot smoother and easier to walk on. The older ones that haven't been restored are much rounder and harder to walk on because they're not nearly as smooth. This spot, it's been partly restored, and this long road had all these columns along each side, and then they think they were probably like a covered with some kind of a roof or something like a portcullis or something like that, so that you could walk through in the shade. This is right in front of their temple, and so the bottom picture on the right hand side, it's in ruins mostly, but there you can see quite a bit, and they are in the process of restoring that. So you're looking at the courtyard there in the bottom right hand corner, and then you can walk up the stairs into the temple. It's much, much larger than it looks like in this picture. It's really a very huge building. But these are some of the ruins that you might see if you were to go and look in that. This is inside the temple. Those stairs have been restored. There is just some of the things that you can see. And then on the bottom left-hand picture is places where they are staging some of the rocks and their carved stones that need to be restored. So like those round ones you see are parts of columns, and they're numbered, and these are where the archaeologists work so that they can start to put those back together and make it something that, you know, what it used to be. The other one up at the top left-hand side is just part of the street. As you're walking down, there's these big carved out buildings on the side of the street. Again, they're mostly facades. You can go inside, but they're small inside, so just small little areas. That's mostly it. I think that's the last slide I have. It is. Oh, just one more thing. I talked about earlier how you could put artificial light inside some of the vehicles. So that picture of the helicopter there on the top left-hand side is one of those where I did some just creative lighting to make it just to give you a little bit more of a feeling about the place. Now that's kind of more of a spooky feeling, but there's lots of things that you can do to be creative there. So thank you for having me. Is there any questions, or would anybody like to ask any questions?
Petra, this is Kathy. A lot of the things in Petra remind me so much of Utah, except the buildings are much more ornate than the cliff dwellings that you find in Utah and southern Colorado.
You know, I had that thought as well. When I was there, that my husband said, "Oh, I've never seen anything like this." And I said, "Really? We've been to Utah. You've seen this before." And he was like, "Oh yeah, I kind of forgot about that." But yeah, something's kind of similar. I wonder if they, you know, I don't know. That's just an interesting thing. But yes, carved in rock like that.
So the diving, is there any like seasonality to it, or is it mostly the same stuff year round?
It's mostly the same stuff year round, although it is a little bit seasonal because it does get cooler in the winter and warmer in the summer, but not a lot cooler and a lot warmer. It's like Southern California type weather. So what the Red Sea is down at sea level, so it's a little warmer than like Wadi Rum and Petra can be a little bit cooler because they're up in the mountains.
What's water temperature like?
It was about 80 degrees, so plenty warm, very comfortable. And I think I've dived the Red Sea quite a bit, and the Red Sea can get down to like 75, you know, in the winter time. So, and it's a little bit cooler in the summer too, maybe up to 78 or 80 degrees. Not like the Caribbean that can get, you know, 85, 90 degrees. It stays somewhere in the high 70s or low 80s.
Cool. Any other questions?
Well,
I had a question.
It looks like it'd be a great place to visit. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. I recommend it. It's a nice place to visit.
I had a question about the military museum underwater. Is that one? Can you see it all in one dive, or is like a bunch of dives that you did to see that, or?
The military museum you can see in one dive. So those 19 vehicles are all one dive. You start at the bottom about 90 feet, and there's vehicles every 10 to 15 feet, or maybe a little bit further apart, but you can see that all in one dive. But the airplanes are separate dives, each a separate dive. The ships, so I only showed one ship, but there's actually 3 or 4 ships that have been sunk. A couple of them are a little bit deeper, more for tech divers, so we didn't do those. But the Cedar Pride is in 65 feet or so, more for recreational divers. So those are all separate dive sites. But the military museum is all one dive site. But then again, there's other military vehicles, like there's a tank here and there. There's other things underwater. So it's just very interesting because you can spend. I easily spend a whole week, and I could have spent more time.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Brooke.